Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Pan from ChainNews, the moderator of EDCON's Layer 2 panel. Thanks everyone to join us. Yeah, we really see the DeFi summer last year, the gas price to hundred or thousands of GUA. And these days, we saw the NFT mania push to very high GUA these days. And Layer 2 adoption may take time. So let's talk about this today. Before we deep dive to the question, I'd like to let everyone to brief introduction and your latest progress of Layer 2. So I think we can start with Louis Lu, the CEO and founder of Kyber Network.
Hey guys, we're at Kyber and we're building different liquidity protocols running on Ethereum and expanding to other public blockchains at the moment. Internally, we have been doing a lot of experiments with other layer 2s and also having some sort of prototype and basically our own construction for our AMM on layer 2 as well, and hopefully we can share the result soon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Next one, the Yuan Su, CTO of Metis.
Hi, my name is Yuan. So I'm the CTO and co-founder of Metis. So I hope you all had a chance to check out the presentation delivered by our CEO, Elena. Metis aims to provide infrastructure for the Web3 economy. What my team and myself focus on, of course, is the technology part of it. Currently, we are busy with launch of the public testament net. Thanks for having me and looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, welcome, Yuan from Metis. Okay. And next one, John Adler, the co-founder of Fuel Labs.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's John. I'm the co-founder of Fuel Labs. I do protocol research and specification, and I review a bunch of PRs there. We have built Fuel V1, which was the first optimistic rollup to launch on mainnet Ethereum. And we are currently building Fuel V2, which will support full Ethereum-style smart contracts in the UTXO data model.
Yeah, thanks. Last one, Louis Guthmann, product manager and blockchain researcher at StarkWare.
Hi, my name is Louis. I'm a product manager and blockchain researcher at StarkWare. StarkWare is a blockchain company focusing on ZKP, zero knowledge proofs, and to bring scalability to Ethereum using ZK rollups. We exist for the last 3 years. We are in production with 4 different companies today, respectively Diversify, Immutable, Sorare, and DYDX. And DYDX just to show that the L2 is already there, DYDX just settled $10 billion of volume in the space of 4 months, and Sorare just reduced by a factor of 50 at least their consumption of gas from on L1 before and after working with us.
Yeah, I see the DYDX. Yeah, I also tried DYDX these days, and actually other than with DYDX, I tried Optimism and Aztec and ZK previously, but the transaction fee is not as low as I expected. We expected, and everyone is saying the rollup can scaling 100 times than the layer 1. But after when I tried Optimism last week, it's around 10 times less than the layer 1's fees. It's around several dollars to provide liquidity to the Uniswap V3. So I don't know if it's too low or too high these days, but I don't know if will it have the potentials to lower the fees in the future, or do we have other potential efficiency increase in the future? That's my first question. I think we can start with Louis from Kyber, the only DeFi protocol here. Yeah.
Sure. I think we've done as I mentioned earlier, we've done a few experiments with different protocols as well. And I think different protocols will have different kind of fees, right? Like for example, but I think most of them still need to submit the data, the raw data, to the layer 1. And I think that's basically, I think arguably is the fixed cost that everyone will have to pay at least, right? So I think that one we cannot make it cheaper. And of course, depending on the approach and the design of different solutions, then you might have to pay other fees. Like for example, I think in most of the ZK rollup solution, you have to pay for the cost to verify the proof, right? To verify the ZK proof on chain, and that one is quite expensive as well. So if you can verify a lot of transactions within that proof, then I think the cost is smaller, right? Otherwise, it's getting more expensive. And I think like for the case of like optimism and other optimistic rollup, then there's potentially the cost of submitting the proof and things like that when there's a dispute, right? But which happens not that frequent. I think most of the time people like ignore that kind of cost. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah. So how about 3 scaling solutions? Your opinion of these questions? Yeah, Matt, maybe we can start with Metis.
All right, so I can start first. So again, I'm going to focus on the optimistic rollup, which I'm more familiar with. So I think Lori, if I pronounce correctly, sorry if I butcher your name, is right. So a lot of cost is associated with the requirement of submitting the data to the mainnet, and that data availability is very important for optimistic rollup because the verifiers need those data to verify whether there is some fraudulent behaviors and initiate a challenge process. So that is almost a fixed cost. But I just want to first say one thing, no matter what, the cost is still significantly less than mainnet. So the value is definitely there. Even 10 times, it's not a small feat, right? If you have 100 transactions, it's a lot of money that you saved on layer 2. So that's the first point I have. But if you look back, since last year, I believe last year we were looking at the cost of layer 2. It is much higher than this one you are seeing. There were actually a lot of technical advancement that different teams and researchers have made to optimize the data, especially the transaction data put on the chain, and they have optimized the signatures, they have optimized the compressions and all stuff. And the current is already optimization, and I think the researchers haven't given up yet, and there are still some active researchers going on to further optimize that data submission process. And at Metis, so we actually have teams working on a alternative solution to try to solve that data availability problems in a cheaper way. So we're actually looking at utilizing a similar technology like IPFS. The reason why we're looking at IPFS was that when we look at the nature of OR, optimistic rollup, the data access pattern is actually has a recency bias. Recency pattern. What I mean by recency pattern is the most recent transactions actually most demanded by the verifiers. They want to look at the latest and freshest transactions to verify. And that actually plays along very well with the IPFS pinning mechanism. So with those technology liking the similar access patterns, so that's why we are actively looking at utilizing IPFS as an alternative data storage or data availability providers for transaction data. So it is actually going on right now at Metis, and once it's complete, we expect a significant reduction of the transaction cost. I can't wait to share more details in the future, but I'm very confident that's going to happen. And the third point I want to make is a lot of people are already starting to speculate whether all those layer 2 solutions will actually drive the Ethereum price up instead of going down, because we expect there'll be more transaction happening on layer 2, and eventually all the data will be submitted to layer 1 and drives the gas price up. So as a professional in this particular field working on the solutions, I do want to be very mindful about the amount of data we submit to the layer 1 when we're designing our solutions.
Yeah, thanks. And how about John? How have you calculated the Fuse version 1 previously?
Yes. Fuel, each transaction should take around a few hundred gas. It's extremely low overhead. So to answer your question, I think, well, I agree with the previous 2 panelists here, which is that it's a combination of some fixed costs that are largely dependent on details around the implementation. For instance, you have Starks, you have to verify Starks, they're expensive. If you have optimistic rollups, you have to post blocks, you have to post the data availability, you have to post the signatures and stuff. And all of this just adds costs. You also have to do things like account for gas on layer 2. So depending on your sequencer choice, you might have to do certain things. For instance, Optimism will actually just literally burn gas on Ethereum in a loop. They'll just burn user gas, and they need this as a denial of service protection, which is debatable whether or not that's good user experience to just burn gas for no reason in a for loop. But you have to do certain things like this because of implementation choices. And the second thing, which the panelists have said, is that it's a combination of poor, or let's say immature optimizations. We're still pretty young into how these things are implemented across all rollups and even sidechains and stuff. You know, things like, can you have a more efficient representation? Can you have better leader selection that's less, that uses less gas and stuff? All these things will become more efficient and better optimized in the near future. So it's a combination of those things. Mostly, I think why we've seen transaction fees on layer 2 and other scaling stuff be higher than expected. That being said, even a small decrease in transaction cost, even if it's like a factor of 2, which it isn't, it's something like a factor of 10. Even if it was a small decrease, it'll still be really good because a decrease is a decrease. You can't say no to that. But I think another point that we should bear in mind is one of the reasons that rollups are so expensive is because they have to compete for data availability with DeFi transactions and arbitrage and MEV and all that. If we had a chain that was dedicated just to general purpose data availability, then solutions like rollup could become substantially cheaper because data availability and execution are actually orthogonal things, and they can and should be priced orthogonally. For more information, you can check out my talk at ECC.
Good one,
okay,
really
thanks.
good one.
Yeah. And last one, how about Luis? Your thoughts? Yeah.
Sure. So as John perfectly said, like there is in a ZK rollup. So I'm going to talk about ZK rollup specifically. In the ZK rollup, like in optimistic rollup, there is a lower bound, which is for on-chain data. So in the case of a ZK rollup, you actually don't pay for the signature, so you pay for the bare minimum of data. There is no overhead because of the proof, but for instance, in the context of StarkWare, we have now this technology called Sharp, where all the system, all the application that run into our ecosystem are sharing proofs. So for instance, Diversify moved to Sharp, and they are doing a lot less transaction than StarkWare. They saw their transaction cost their overhead per proof divided by 70%. And which doesn't include yet the YDX, which is also 5 times more transactions than StarkWare. So at this point, whatever the application side that you get today, you basically no longer pay the overhead, the full price overhead, depending on related to any application, even the smallest one can run using ZKPs. But there is another point about L2's cost, which is the on-chain cost, which is in the context of a ZK rollup, you have the more design space when it comes to data availability. And as we saw, for instance, in StarkWare and Diversity and Immutable, when it comes to NFTs, sometimes it doesn't make sense to spend $1 when you mint a $5 asset. And while we're waiting for ETH 2.0 to solve the availability solution, the availability, ZK rollup enables you to choose as a user if you want to be on chain or if you want to be off chain. And if you are off chain, you can get to transaction cost as low as, I know, for Reddit, we did transaction costs at 17 gas. So yeah, really, the design space is pretty big here when it comes to ZK rollup.
Yeah, I see like Metro Labs or StarkNet also have the on-chain solution and off-chain solution, which user can choose, right?
Right, that's called Volition. And it's a pretty strong design space. And even like, for instance, let's talk about StarkNet. So in many transactions today on Ethereum require on-chain data. Data that could be considered what we call witness in the context of transaction. For instance, signature are a witness, meaning that once I consume them, I don't really need them anymore. But for instance, things like approval on the ERC20 is technically a witness. You don't really need it to get self-custody, which is at the end of the day, the end goal. So having this flexibility enables to new design patterns that provide lower transaction costs for users.
Yeah, sure. Next one, I want to talk about the how to say the narrow scaling directions. We see most of the layer 2 already or will implement EVM or any kind of VM in the layer 2, but we also see some of the layer 2 support normal transaction in the very early beginning, like ZK Sync 1 or Hermes, the current version of Hermes, like or Aztec. Yeah. So do you think the pure transaction layer 2 have its own opportunity, or this very narrow scaling direction will not exist in the future? And I also have a question around the NFT things right now, because is it difficult to build an NFT specific scaling solution right now? Yeah. How, maybe Luis? Yeah.
Sure. So just So I'm going to generalize a tiny bit this question, because StarkWare started with like what you call the transaction only network. I would call single dApp rollup, and StarkWare has been having several single dApp rollup for over a year now. So diversify, immutable, StarkWare, and DYDX. And so what we saw so far is that they provide scalability today. Like having those apps on the network today is crazy. Like I just said, like DYDX reducing by 50x, divided by 50x transaction cost. Now, from our perspective, the end game is definitely moving them to a general purpose network, because we have many teams reaching out to us saying, oh, I want to build on top of StarkWare. I want to build on top of Immutable. I want that composability. And when you build like single dApp application, you can get that. So there is very strong network effect from general purpose L2s. Now, when it comes to NFT specifically, you're perfectly right. Like Immutable X right now is building an NFT only rollup. But those NFT, the end game for them too, from our perspective at least, it's to move them to StarkNet. So as I said, various projects can come in and build new features on top of their infrastructure.
Yeah, and how about John? Because I think your layer 2, your version 2 just added the will add the general computation or VM things. So what's your opinion?
Yeah. So I'll similar to Louis, I'll generalize the question to not just payments, but also to just application-specific rollups or application-specific chains. I'll also take a more optimistic point of view, which is that I think there is room for them, but you have to be careful because there's a trade-off. You lose composability, but you gain potentially a lot of scalability and a lot of flexibility. And you can potentially get around this lack of composability if you don't need like atomic single transaction composability. Like you're not going to flash loan an NFT. So like, do you really need single transaction atomic composability as opposed to just being able to query the data? Maybe not. So solutions like Cosmos's IBC could be very promising here for cross-chain communication protocols, which would allow multiple application-specific blockchains and roll-ups or just blockchains to communicate with each other. So I definitely think there's the space for them, but that doesn't mean everything will be application-specific. There's pros and cons to each, and I think there's a space for each if people are careful with what they build.
Yeah, and I have a question about you. Is it hard to implement the NFT things in your version 2?
No, it'll be very simple. It'll be like implementing NFTs on Ethereum. Fuel V2 will support full Ethereum style smart contracts. So whatever you see in the EVM today in Solidity or whatever, it'll be that. It'll probably be easier because we're also implementing a high level language that's based on Rust called Sway. So it should be even easier to write secure, efficient smart contracts than in Solidity.
Okay, sure. Next, what about Metis?
Yeah, so for Metis, we have a general purpose EVM in place. I do believe one thing. So everything we do here consists of certain degree of trade-offs. Trade-offs from security, performance, cost, and degree of centralization, composability, like John said. So there's always a balance we want to aim for. At Metis we choose this breadth of application use cases, this the ability to handle general case over the other things, specialization stuff. But I believe all the different specialized chains, they all have great and fantastic technologies actually. I believe they can not only survive, I think they will excel in those specialization areas. And there are definitely needs in the market. And this whole thing, honestly, this is a vast blue ocean. And there are, I believe there are enough opportunities for everyone to survive and thrive there. So that'd be my point.
Yeah, sure. And how about Louis? You have anything to add?
Yeah, so at Kyber, we are building our own AMM specific layer 2, right, using ZK-Web. And I think what we realized is that we can do a lot of things to optimize the circuit, right, and hence optimize the proof. But there are certainly like some limitations, in terms of like composability with other dApps and things like that. But we treated it as an experiment, so I think for us it's fine. I think one thing that we probably will see in the future is that I think the gas race between apps in layer 1 will happen in layer 2, right? It will happen in the general purpose layer 2. So I'm not sure whether or the general purpose layer 2 will have like any thought on that, or they have thought on that at all yet, right? I think that would be an interesting issue to see in the futures.
Yeah, I think everyone agreed the end game is a general purpose layer 2, but everyone has any current solutions right now. I think StarkWare is a very best to have DYDX, diversify, or immutable. Yeah, every kind of app specific solution. Yeah. Next is about
sorry, Pan, before can I address what Louis just threw out at us, like the gas price for general purpose layer 2 solutions? I think that's a very good question. I believe a lot of people are saying, hey, if you have a layer 2 solution, will that happen? Will the gas price for layer 2 solution be the same as the mainnet, where you can see a constant increase based on the demands of the system? I would say it is definitely something that we absolutely consider when we design the system. At least in Metis, we have the sharding already planned in the design, and that's part of the architecture of it. So when the chain becomes busy, the sharding kicks in, and we'll keep the gas price low. But it is something that we definitely consider very heavily.
Yeah.
I do want to say something specifically about this, and actually I'm going to quote John from FCC, like a talk from FCC, which is it's all about hardware requirement. So the problem right now about gas fee is like people when people talk about scalability, they compare, for instance, scalability of Ethereum versus scalability of Bitcoin. They don't understand. They don't compare the same thing. Bitcoin target machine is the Raspberry Pi, when Ethereum target machine is roughly a $40 machine on AWS. And we're not talking about the same thing. The same thing, Solana machine is expected to cost $1,000 a month. So when we're talking about what machine do I need to verify things and scalability, it all comes down to what machine it's required. The thing is, and this is where ZK Rollup has a very strong advantage, is that ZK Rollup separate the full mining, like the sequencer nodes, which can have extremely strong machine because they're getting paid for it, and the average Joe machine, the guy who's going to verify without being a sequencer. And what we care about for decentralization is the little guy being able to verify. The big guy getting paid for it, I mean, fine. We need decentralization, so we don't need like a Google size machine. But if you require a machine that costs him like $5,000 a month, he's spending more in GPUs today, in electricity. So it's not a big issue for him. So as a as a consequence, what I'm trying to say here is you shouldn't expect too high gas price, at least in the key rollup, because we can scale machine for sequencer while remaining low bandwidth and low cost for non-sequencing machines.
Yeah. John, do you want to give any feedback? Reply?
Sure. I mean, regardless of how much throughput your chain supports, eventually you'll end up hitting some sort of bottleneck somewhere, right? Like even if you have, logarithmic verification time, that logarithmic isn't constant. Eventually you'll hit a point where that logarithm is bigger than the size of the Earth or something. If you have a computer that big, if you scale up that high, so even if you increase throughput a huge amount, you'll still end up with a fee market. The question is, how much good for the world can you have until you hit that point? When you hit that threshold, when you have to have an actual active fee market. Starks and Starks are good in this respect because they do provide some benefits in the sense that verification is cheaper than production. And I do want to pile on this point that a lot of people, like I agree completely with Louis here, that a lot of people say or complain, oh, we need the really cheap validator nodes. But I was like, no, that's not what you need. Validator nodes can be expensive, but the block production nodes can be expensive. It's the user full nodes that must be cheap because we want to be able to keep the block producers accountable, right? We want to be able to know that they're doing things correctly and know when they're doing things incorrectly to either ignore them or penalize them in some way, right? It's like if you take an E2 node, okay, it costs $100,000 for 32 ETH at the current price of Ether, right? And like you're gonna say, well, we need to constrain your validator nodes to run on a Raspberry Pi. That's ridiculous. Like, I'm sorry, if you have $100,000 to run one single validator node, you can afford a laptop, you can afford more powerful desktop, you can afford a Solana full node, even at that price, right? So it's a little bit ridiculous to say, to optimize for the wrong thing. You're optimizing for the wrong thing if you say you need to be able to run a block producer on a Raspberry Pi. Make block producers as expensive as you want. It's irrelevant as long as we can hold them accountable. And in that regard, Starks and Starks do have some nice properties.
Yeah. Luis, do you want to do anything? Do you have anything?
I think Louis or Louis?
Luis.
So I couldn't agree more. I agree. I kind of went a jump a bit ahead when I said that there is no limit of machines, of course, and there is some upper bound. De facto, actually, for your knowledge, John, actually the likelihood of us getting basically filling the whole block with a proof, I think we require like Google-sized machine, Google-sized database, data center to get to those type of proof in terms of generating the proof. But outside of the joke, and I 100% align with what John just said.
Yeah, sure. So let's get to the third part, the adoption things of layer 2. As the Optimism and Arbitrum still not released the full mainnet version, but they are all talking about this month or next month. And ZK-Sync, StarkNet, or Aztec not released the programmable version right now. So do you think the layer 2's adoption still takes much longer than we expected? Or maybe we need to wait 1 year to let the dApps to move to layer 2 and users migrate to layer 2? It should take much longer time. Yeah. What's your thought? Yeah. Maybe start with Louis from Kyber.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think user experience matters, right? I think what we have seen at, like for example, BSC and also like the POS of Polygon chain, really show that like user they just like move to the chain where they can do like fast and cheap transaction and can really like, enjoy a better experience. I think layer 2 is approaching there. Currently, I think it's still like mainly for the technical users, right? And I think another reason is that I think the trade-off in different layer 2 solutions are not explicitly communicated. Like for example, like what you need to submit to L1 and what you're supposed to pay, when is the transaction actually finalized and things like that. I think all these are quite complicated, like for the normal users to understand. I think it's going to take some time and some education as well, apart from the technical requirement, the technical development requirement, right? Yeah, but I think we are getting there. I think with the development of a few projects that StarkWare is involved, I think we see great traction there. Hopefully, with the other project like Optimism and a few others, we're going to see much better adoption.
Yeah, maybe you can start with liquidity mining to incentive users to move to layer 2.
I think that's there are going to be like several ways to incentivize users to move there, right? I think people already did that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And how about Louis from StarkWare? Yeah.
I mean, like I can show you that once you put the right incentive, people move to L2s, and I guess the simplest and easiest one is DYDX.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
I mean, they just passed, I said, 10 billion. They are, I think, yesterday they made 500 million in like volume in the same day. And the incentivization the token provide definitely is a very strong incentive to move. Now, like if the question is like, does the adoption of L2s is going to be longer than expected? I mean, L2s are already there. Like I said, UIDX is extremely successful. We see the success of sidechain already. And sidechain as like, we have been talking to various projects, and one of the main issues they have with sidechain is not the decentralization, is that because you use a tech that is, a bit consensus based, your bridge has very big risk. So I expect to see a lot of those existing projects, big project that goes to sidechain, to move to an L2 to get a more better proven security on their bridge. So either L2 adoption too longer than expected, I would say it's already here.
Okay. Yeah, but I just
sorry to jump in, but like maybe it's better to if you have some numbers on like the number of users and things like number of transactions and like that on a few platforms that you have, I think that would be interesting. Yeah.
Happy to. DYDX, I think it's in public. I think the number is public, so I can give it to you. I think it's yesterday last week they did 600,000 transaction, which represented something like, if you put back that to like on Ethereum, would be like 12. Like StarkX deployment in the last week in terms of transactions represented 12% of the Ethereum bandwidth. Like if those transactions were to be on Ethereum, they would be 12% of the entire block space of Ethereum. And so I mean, so yeah, I pointed that, and this is growing. The week before it was 7%. Like StarkWare is picking up, Immutable is picking up, Diversify is picking up. Like from my perspective, we see like just a growth coming every day. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I know. But when I start this question, I just want to highlight the roll-up part. You said DYDX is a different story, I see. Yeah. Yeah, and I think next, Yuan, how about you?
Yeah, sure. So my answer would depend on the definition of L2 adoption. As you can already hear, I think Louis said they have different answers because of the different definition of L2 adoption. I'm going to throw something controversial. To me, I really believe the overall blockchain adoption is still pretty low compared to what is happening out there in the other side of the world. As I mentioned earlier, this is a huge blue ocean, and there's still many opportunities for everyone to take on. I hope one takeaway that this audience has is the awareness the technology is almost there. I tell you, the technology is almost there, and we're ready to dramatically expand the use cases for blockchain. We just need the applications. I really think we are at an inflection point where we can see, we can witness a explosion of blockchain-based application. Layer 2 is definitely one of the major catalysts for this golden era of blockchain. You can see a lot of delays from Optimism, from Arbitrum, because this technology is indeed very complicated. There are many moving parts in the system. I don't want to bore the audience of the complications and challenges we're overcoming and we're still facing. But it is definitely a fascinating technology, and I absolutely believe the future. And I think, similar to Luis, I think the adoption is here. I think we're already adopting it. It just needs a very good application to let people to this technology and get the general public to adopt blockchain as a mainstream technology. I'm very confident about it.
And how about John, your expectation of your Fuel version 2's adoption?
Sure. So can I get some clarification on the question? Are you asking how long will adoption take after these chains were deployed, or are you more asking why did it take so long for these chains to be deployed?
I think the first part, yeah, the first.
Okay,
yeah.
So after they're deployed, how long will it take to get adoption?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in that case, I would say for all these chains, adoption will come very quickly once they're deployed. And we've seen this on Optimism, for instance, right? Optimism's UX, both in the developer and user side, was quite poor this whole time. And this isn't like a slight to them, because guess what? Ethereum's UX is also pretty bad, right? And it's not necessarily getting better. Like you have 1559 introducing 2 fee settings now instead of just 1. So it's, the Ethereum's UX is also pretty atrocious. So the this isn't like a slight to Optimism in particular, but it's like all UX around layer 2 is terrible, right? And it can get better, but the thing is, despite the fact that Optimism had no composability because they had no applications other than 1, and the developer and user UX was terrible, which again are not slights. Despite all this, they still have $100 million locked because of one little thing, which is called printing money and giving it to users through liquidity mining. Polygon, not to single them out, but they're a side chain, or at least the proof of stake side chain is a side chain. Just before Mihailo comes and yells at me for calling Polygon a side chain, they didn't really have too much adoption going on when they were trying to do their Manic chain and stuff. And then I think, if I remember well, Aave came on board and they did liquidity mining and just gave people a bunch of money. And now they're one of the biggest, scaling projects on Ethereum or in the blockchain space in general. Tokens can be used to build communities, for instance. And, I think many layer 2s are either going to use their own tokens, or they're going to do liquidity mining from projects that build on top of them. For example, Aave launching on Polygon, for instance. Optimism doesn't have a token yet publicly, but they do have synthetics. That was their one application with no composability because there was no other applications. And that one application did liquidity mining, if I remember well, on Optimism. And they managed to draw, $100 million total value locked in there. And I expect other applications that launch or that relaunch on layer 2 will do similar things to that, because otherwise no one would use those applications, right? So it's for the good of the applications too that they would do such things. So I think it'll be very easy once these layer 2s are actually launched, if they support liquidity mining either on their own or through applications that build on top of them. I think it'll be very easy to get adoption. The problem is if a layer 2 launches without any sort of incentives, then that might take a bit longer, because then you're relying purely on technicals, and as we know in the space, no one's in it for the tech. We're all in it for a number go up, right?
Yeah, sure. That's why I want to talk about the fourth question, because last layer 2 talking about their consensus. I think most layer 2 still not release their consensus of the validator or sequencers, and I remember most of them starts with 1 operating node, because they are lack of the consensus. Do you think will this become a very big problem of the layer 2? And have you heard or do you know anything about the progress of they design the layer 2 consensus, how you design the layer 2 consensus? I think, how about John?
Sure, I can start off. The nice thing about rollups in particular is that since they inherit security from the main chain, you don't need a full-blown, say, BFT style consensus protocol. You don't need 2/3 of some stakers voting on some block. because you don't need that security, right? The point of 2/3 of stakers voting on a block is if they vote on an incorrect block or an incorrect fork, or they try to reorg the chain, you can slash at least 1/3 of that stake, right? That's accountable safety. But like, you don't need this because you have the base blockchain. You have Ethereum or whatever chain you use for data availability. It could be Celestia, for instance. You have that chain act as a timestamping mechanism. Once you have a timestamping server, then you don't need the block producers of the rollup to timestamp things, right? They are just there to create blocks, essentially, to order transactions, not to timestamp them, which are orthogonal things. So the way you do block production in layer 2, the way you do this consensus in layer 2 can be much it can be much simplified than what you have in layer 1. So I've been calling this process merge consensus, and you can see various posts and stuff I wrote about merge consensus. But now the implementation details, or like how you do this specifically, every single project I've seen does it differently, right? Like Arbitrum has this inbox model, Fuel V1 has a priority aggregator. They don't have individual transactions, but anyone can be a block producer, just one has priority. Optimism has a single sequencer now. I don't know what their plans are in the future, but either way, every chain, every raw project has a different way of doing this. And I'll say that let's say it's still an open problem. How to do this, like if there's a way to do this without major trade-offs, I think it's still an open problem. Every choice that every chain has made has some downsides and it has some upsides. For instance, Optimism, because of their particular choice, they need this notion of nuisance gas, which is, like I said before, they just burn layer 1 Ethereum gas in a loop. They just like waste money, literally. They just burn money. They just throw away money. And they need this as a denial of service vector prevention. And this is because of the particular choice of leader selection protocol. If they did something different, maybe they wouldn't need this. I don't think Arbitrum needs it. So there's upsides and there's downsides to every single choice. And so far, we haven't seen one leader selection protocol that is just better in that is strictly better. It's still an open question.
Yeah, sure. How about Louis from Kyber? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think the centralized operator on layer 2 will make all the attacks regarding like centralized miners on layer 1 worse, right? Like for example, like they can order the transaction as they like. They can even like decide to exclude transaction from the users that they want to exclude and things like that, right? So I think sooner or later, probably most of the layer 2 will have to find a way to decentralize the operators, right? I think even for Kyber in our experiment, we're also like working. We're also like building a full-fledged like BFT consensus for our layer 2 operators. And the reason why we can do this is because we basically like focus on one particular use case, right? So we can optimize the circuit and things like that to make it quite simple. I'm not sure like whether like it's gonna like make things much more complicated for other like general purpose layer 2. But for Kyber specific use case, we do see the advantage of focusing on one single application there. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. How about Yuan?
I will start saying, you may sound familiar, the answer depends on your definition of consensus. So in my opinion, all layer 2 solutions, no matter what the underlying technology, they have consensus mechanism. It's just not the traditional way of consensus. Using options rollup as example, the data consensus. What I mean by data consensus is that they actually submit all those data, and that consensus is happening on layer 1. So that's happening all the time, every time a rollup happens. But the execution consensus is not happening. Is not happening all the time. It's on demand by the challengers. But what I mean by execution consensus, if you're given an initial state, have a bunch of transactions, a batch of transactions, and whether the end state is actually the result of the execution of that batch of transactions, that's the execution consensus. That's not happening on layer 1 all the time. But that's optimistically deferred to the top challengers on the pay-per-view basis. So on that note, I have a similar opinion that I do think from a security point of view, it's not the end of the world to have one operator operating node. because the consensus actually inherited from the layer 1 mainnet. I mean, we do at Metis, we do value decentralization to guarantee business continuity. I think that's probably the bigger problem. As I mentioned, when we design the technologies, there are always trade-offs, and we're constantly making trade-offs all the time, actually. And I absolutely understood why all the layer 2 solutions are designing, making certain design decisions, especially in the short term. So our goal at Metis is to allow anyone to operate a node and participate into this Metis multi-chain ecosystem. So as of yesterday, we have actually enabled the peer nodes in our network. And that's a important step towards that mission. I'm very happy about it, and we made it yesterday. And so really looking forward to talk more about it in the coming weeks. At the same time, we also have teams working on a specific validation system called Rangers. That is, again, not the traditional consensus that we usually talk about, the block consensus. It's more of a transaction consensus, focus on the execution consensus. We actually, in that system, employs a set of randomly selected participants who validate transactions and stables all the time and get incentives along with it. And interestingly, it is actually quite a similar mechanism that Vitalik talked about on the first day of the conference. Purely coincidence, by the way. So that was quite fascinating when I was watching that particular talk. But then again, every system that we put in, any additional system, there are trade-offs. For example, the validation system we just talked about, the Rangers, it will actually drive the transaction cost up by nature, because we're going to give incentives to the validators. Of course, it's going to come somewhere. But then this cost will be hopefully offset by the use of IPFS, which I mentioned in the first question. That should dramatically reduce the transaction cost. So as CTO, I'm constantly making these decisions of different trade-offs, and hopefully we can strike the perfect balance, and that's our goal.
Yeah, thanks. I think the StarkWare and StarkNet using different design. Is it correct, Luis?
So let's. Roughly speaking, StarkNet has the same core design that you roll up when it comes to design space. Meaning like a single sequencer, and we are going to start with single sequencer. I mean, we are starting with single sequencer, StarkNet being in testnet. But we are in universe, we are looking for decentralization. As John say, the leader election, meaning who is organizing the current batch, is still an open question. We right now we are still looking at the various approach to all of this. We don't, for instance, one of the main problem you have is, like, for instance, forced transactions. Forced transaction is one of the most important feature of optimistic rollup. In a ZK rollup, you don't really need, for instance, forced transaction to get the self-custody. And so here we have a question that does impact strongly how you do leader election. And so all of this is still still open question. Right now, we're focusing on getting a single sequencer right, as you can try it on testnet. And whenever we nail that down properly, we will expand toward decentralization, toward bringing the censorship resistance that we are looking for the outing.
Yeah, thanks. And I think our time is running out. So I'm closing it. Thanks everyone for joining us at EDCON's Layer 2 discussion. And thanks John, Yuan, Luis, and Louis from your team. Yeah. So I'll hand back to thanks, and hand back to the EDCONs. Yeah. Thanks. Bye everyone.